Compliance Director with ThinkTennessee. I'm joined today by my colleagues Helen and Amy, and today we're going to be walking you through an exciting conversation about data and how it can be useful in your work as nonprofit leaders, including walking you through two exciting tools that we've produced at the state and county level. So first, just to give you a quick agenda for our conversation today. First, I'll just give you a quick introduction to Think Tennessee, just a broad overview of our mission and work. Then we'll take some time to explore the 2025 State of our State dashboard, which was just released a couple months ago. So we'll review our key takeaways and talk about the 15 metrics that matter most, a new economic mobility framework that we developed this year. Then we'll showcase how you can do a county deep dive on some of those issue areas through the State of our Counties dashboard. And then finally, we'll present how this data can inform the role that nonprofits play in statewide and local community work, discussing some important considerations and limitations when using this data. And as Andrea mentioned, we'll have some time throughout the presentation to ask questions as we go, and then we'll have a more robust Q&A and feedback session at the very end. So a little bit about Think Tennessee. We are a nonpartisan, results-oriented think tank that uses research, engagement, and advocacy to build a state where all Tennesseans are civically engaged and economically secure. So we work in partnership with state and local leaders to drive evidence-based policies that strengthen the voice of voters, better support working families, and move Tennessee forward. We are a relatively young organization still. When we launched in 2017, we had just one full-time staff person committed to this work, and today we are actually in the process of hiring our 11th. So this growth has honestly enabled us to expand our issue focus and to conduct more research to serve the needs of our community. In addition to our mission to provide actionable data and information, we also work in partnership with other organizations to identify policy priorities for advocacy. So at our core, Think Tennessee focuses in two program areas. The first is strengthening democracy, which includes issues of good governance, voting access, as well as judicial independence and fair redistricting. The other portfolio that we focus on is our Supporting Working Families program, and that includes issues related to family income, such as fair labor laws, living wages, workforce development, affordability of basic needs like childcare, housing, and transportation, as well as debt, and particularly within the debt realm, we focus on court fines and fees. So each year we actually work with our partner organizations, our board, and others to develop a list of policy priorities. And so that's what you're seeing here on the screen for 2025. So I'll just highlight a few. This year we've been focusing on reducing barriers to absentee voting and improvements to the voting rights restoration process. We've been working on developing a policy roadmap for increasing voter registration rates and turnout, and strengthening the judicial system, good governance, and civic engagement. On the working family side, we've been focused on workforce development, expanding paid family and medical leave, housing supply and affordability, childcare, improving building standards and energy efficiency, as well as improving the quality and accessibility of criminal justice system data. If you haven't had the chance to check out some of our work from the past year, I'll just highlight a few. One is a recent summary of the 2025 session. It's our 2025 legislative session summary. So go check that out to review all of the bills in the Strengthening Democracy and Supporting Working Families portfolios. We also will be talking about this in a little bit, but had our State of our Counties dashboard released last year. A recent report on energy affordability and reliability, and 5 policy briefs this spring on absentee voting, childcare, housing, and workforce development. We have some exciting work to come, so definitely sign up for our emails and things. We have a link to that later, but upcoming we have a report on voter education, so taking a look at voting policies in all 50 states. We'll also be releasing a report on the criminal justice system here in Tennessee. That's a pretty expansive report. And then we'll also have another expansive report on what we're calling the state of working Tennessee. So thinking about Tennessee's economy and in particular, what's working for working Tennesseans. So with all of that said, I'm now going to hand it over to Helen to talk a little bit about why data should matter to everybody on this call, regardless of your role and whether your organization is a policy shop like ours or a group that provides direct services to your members. So Helen, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Mary. Yes, before going into our specific resources, highlighting different data points, we wanna give a first little introduction of why can data be useful for organizations like us. Data first can highlight opportunities and challenges across geographies and across communities. That way, there's a way of quantifying a story. There's a lot of instances where we interact with people in the field or even with lawmakers or any kind of different stakeholder, but it's always valuable in a way of saying, well, this is the number of people that are being directly affected by your policy. And that's kind of the numbers that you can find through using data. And as I mentioned, it could be comparing different counties, which is one of those examples will be the county dashboard, or it could be across different demographic groups or income levels. The next one is tracking progress. Looking at specifically longitudinal data, you can see how Tennessee or any other geography or community performs over time. You can also compare after the implementation of a specific policy or program, how has that program affected the community through looking at a specific economic or social indicators through numbers, let's say. We can also use data to communicate impact. Maybe when you look at the Tennessean or different news sources, sometimes they give a big flashing number of saying over 400,000 Tennesseans lose their voting rights through a felony conviction. And those are resources that you get through exploring existing data sources or also conducting research yourself. That is a public-facing communication resource that you can have through data, but it's also very resourceful when utilizing it through communicating results or impacts to grant makers or funders when talking about, well, these are the people that are affected to this current policy, and we want to produce this specific program that could affect this amount of people, and this is the kind of output we want to generate. Also, data can empower clients. I think in many instances where when we target specific communities, there can be a strong sense of isolation when people are facing certain hardships. And data can also say, well, you're not alone in this circumstance. There's many people perhaps that you don't see or you don't engage with that also are facing similar issues that you have. And also understanding what are the common factors that affects a people's current situation also helps us understand how we can help them and how different programs have served elsewhere and how we can implement them here. Finally, data is resourceful or helpful when we want to do data-driven decision making. I think that compiles everything that I've mentioned before, but it informs the way that we design grants. It's the way that it can inform how we implement certain policies or certain programs. And yes, but I think throughout this presentation, we're also going to give specific examples of how ThinkTennessee has used data to implement programs or find more information about the communities affected in our state. So we will explore that a little later. But now we are going to go into our first data-driven, very resourceful dashboard, which is the State of Our State dashboard. The dashboard is a comprehensive look at how Tennessee is performing compared to other states along over 140 key metrics. This dashboard has been conducted since 2017, and now it's in its 7th iteration. And it's a powerful tool for us to help us determine how our policy priorities are and to track progress in the state. We also use it to share data and information with partners and decision makers. If you recall what I said literally 2 minutes ago, it's a way for us to communicate data and results, but it's also a way for us to inform our next steps ahead as an organization. As I mentioned before, we have been doing this since the foundation of this organization, but this year, this new iteration has a lot of new features. The first very flashy feature is that the dashboard is now fully interactive. We currently have 143 indicators across 9 issue areas, and most of those indicators can be disaggregated by race, ethnicity, age, gender, or other categories, including income levels, etc. Then also, I would like to highlight that the data is longitudinal in many cases, in which we can highlight how the state has performed in the same metric across 3 years. And also, we gave the resource for everyone to be able to explore that data through reports, charts, and maps. Also, as I mentioned, there's the 9 issue areas are listed to the right of this presentation. So yeah, but we'll go further into this. So how do you use this dashboard, or how do you first interact with this dashboard? As you see here, you can scroll through issue areas and metrics on one page. The way that you do this is that either through the homepage, the Charting Tennessee's Prosperity, or through the menu on the right-hand side, you can select an issue area. As I mentioned, there's 9 issue areas, so you can go into economic opportunity, education, health, elections and civic life, etc. Once you select that metric, you can see once we can select that indicator issue area, you can see all the indicators available within that issue area right there. In each of those metrics, you see the Tennessee ranking for that metric. You see the actual value for Tennessee. You see the US data average for that given metric, and you see the most recent year for the data that is available. Next, as I mentioned before, you can also see in many instances disaggregated data. So when you go in each of those metrics, you have the option of view by the view by drop-down menu. In that, you select any of the options available. As I mentioned, oftentimes it's race, ethnicity, age, gender, income levels, etc. And once you select that, all the information available in the bars or in the information to the left is going to change accordingly to that different level or demographic group. I would also highlight that in those bars, Tennessee is always the gray bar, and that thin line is the average. So you can see where Tennessee compares to other states. Another note that is important to highlight is that we consider being ranked first as the most positive outcome versus being last or 51st in many cases as the worst outcome for all of our metrics. Next, if you want to do a deeper dive into each of those metrics, you can click Learn More on the top right side of each of our metrics. In there, you will first see in the middle our bar chart, which is pretty much a replica of what you can see in the scroll down version. And then you can also select a US map view in which you can see how geographically other states compare to how Tennessee performs. Then to the left side of the bar chart and map, you can see our metric tiles, that's what we call them. In there, you will see the name of the metric, the specific level that have been selected, the Tennessee ranking, the source and the year of where this data was collected. Those tiles are downloadable for y'all to share on social media or just to keepsakes. And as I mentioned before, any view by option that you select is going to change the information in all the elements available in the dashboard. So if you see here, I have the overall homeowner housing affordability also for people of income 75,000 and more, or with people of income below of $20,000 a year. Next, another very interesting feature for this year is the Tennessee's performance over time, which is a longitudinal line chart in which you see the most recent years of data when available. That one you can again hover over. If you select a specific data point, you will see Tennessee's ranking in that year as well. And that bar chart is also available to download if you want to share it. Finally, in this Learn More section, you can also see the definition of this metric, and you can also see what's the source of this metric. If you want to learn more of how we selected this metrics, I encourage you to go into our technical documentation and understand what was our criteria when selecting our sources and our specific metrics. But again, if anyone that's using this dashboard wants to explore this data source by themselves, you can click on the source name and you can go directly from where we collected this data. Next, as I mentioned before, there are different ways in which you can save this data for yourself. The first one is on each issue area section, you can download a metric report, which collects every single data point that we share for this issue area for Tennessee. Then we also have on the left side menu, the download report section, in which you can have reports for all metrics. You can have the reports for any given issue area that is also downloadable in those issue area sections, or you can also have a demographic report that covers from different age groups, so children and seniors. You can also have a report for women, or you can have a report for Hispanic or Latino, Black or African American, etc. Before we move to the state of our counties, are there any questions when it comes to the state of our state dashboard? I know there's a lot of information. I don't know if there's questions in the chat or anything. No, yeah, okay, wonderful. That I would assume that means that everyone got it perfectly. So great. Next, we're gonna move into the state of our counties dashboard. This is for the first time in 2024, ThinkTennessee released a state of our counties dashboard, in which we cover over 100 indicators across 9 issue areas for all 95 counties. We recognize that oftentimes state level data can obscure the realities of smaller communities, and therefore utilizing this state of our counties dashboard we can understand those disparities and inform local decision makers when producing policy or programming. So now I'm gonna also give a little bit of an overview of how this instrument works. This is how, when you first go into the dashboard, what you see. When you first interact with it, you will want to select a metric category, which is the equivalent of an issue area in the state of our state. So in this case, we have selected economy and we have selected unemployment as our metric. You also have the option to see the county levels for labels for all of 95 counties by checking that box that is on the left side on the menu. You also will see the name of the metric, the definition, and the source that we have collected these values from on the top left side of our map. This is also a feature, very interactive, that you can hover over the map, and if you select any county, you will see the name of the county, of course, the value for that given metric. So let's say here, Sevier County has an unemployment rate of 3.2%, which means that over 1,700 people are unemployed in that given county. Then you'll also see the rank. So Sevier County ranks 19th out of 95 counties for unemployment rates. Again, a lower rank, meaning first, is always better than being last. And you will also see the value for the average Tennessee county, which in this case is 3.7% for unemployment rate. Next, you also, on the top right side, you have this option to enable a comparison tool. What this allows you to do is select 2 metrics across our issue areas and compare them to. So in this case, we have poverty and unemployment, poverty on the x-axis and unemployment on the y-axis. Each point in that graph represents a county. So you see, for instance, if you have selected, let's say, Sevier County, you see that red dot where it's located to other counties. And also you have to option to add a trend line if you're interested in that, but it's important to highlight that in no way, by selecting 2 metrics, we are showcasing any kind of correlation or causation of those 2 indicators. Then, similar to the state of our state, we want to share this data and we want people to research further on this data through different downloadable reports. So the first option to download our report is our metric summaries. The metric summary is going to give you all the ranking or all the counties in Tennessee ranked by that in that given metric. So in this case, we have unemployment and seeing what's the value of each state, each county for that given metric. Next, we have the all metrics for a county download. In this case, we have Davidson County, and for that, you're going to see every single metric available. Therefore, our 104 metrics, the ranking for Davidson County, how much is the actual value of that metric, and how much it differentiates to the county average. And finally, we have a county overview, which in which we kind of highlight, based on our policy priorities, what are the specific metrics in each county that we value overall. Thank you. Now I'm going to move into Amy. Well, in case no one has questions in the county dashboard. Well, that's great. So now I officially move to Amy.
Great. Thank you so much, Helen. So next, what I want to talk about a little bit is putting data into practice and how we are hoping that organizations like ours can use this data and other data sources. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the first way that we're using data is with our 15 metrics that matter most framework. So this is the first time that Think Tennessee has included an economic framework in the state dashboard, particularly highlighting 15 metrics that research shows us matters most to Tennessee's economic prosperity and access to opportunity. As you saw when Helen was going through the dashboard, there's a lot of information there. And we really wanted to find a way that we could really focus people's attention on particular metrics. And again, these are ones that research has shown us really impact economic opportunity through our review of other state and national dashboards, as well as research literature. Next slide, please. So when you go to the main page of the dashboard, you will see our 15 metrics that matter most. And so I wanted to tell you guys how we see the state is doing on these 15 metrics. And we start with the ones where we are best performing. And so the one that we are actually best performing is volunteering, which is perfect for the volunteer state. So almost a third of Tennessee residents have spent time volunteering in the past year. That makes us rank 17th out of all of the states, which is fantastic. Another area where we are doing relatively well is in home ownership. In Tennessee, almost 69% of households own their own homes, and we rank 25th, so right in the middle of all of the states on that particular metric. We also do well on air pollution. We rank number 26th. On renter housing affordability, we're doing okay on this. We rank number 29th state in terms of comparing to other states, which means that 47% of renters spend less than 30% of their income on rent. Spending more than 30% of your rent on of your income on rent is considered being cost burden. So even though we're still doing relatively well, that still means that over half of Tennessee renters are considered cost burden. So one of the just shows you some of the challenges when we use rankings, that sometimes even if we're doing relatively well, it can still mean that some of our Tennessee neighbors are really struggling in some of these areas. So also an area where we're doing relatively well is workers earning living wages. We rank number 29th nationally in this. And just so you know, a living wage for a family with 2 working adults and 1 child in Tennessee is $40.50 an hour. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some of the areas where we're a little bit more in the middle, places where we think we need to improve. So for example, Tennessee ranks 32nd on average commute time to work. On average, Tennesseans take 25.7 minutes to commute to work each day. And obviously that is time that they're not spending with their family or, participating in their neighborhood organizations or things like that. So decreasing commute time is one of our priorities. In addition, Tennessee ranks 35th in low birth weight babies. 9% of Tennessee births are under 5.5 pounds. So that's an important metric when we're looking at maternal and neonatal health. Our labor force participation rate, we rank number 40. So this is where you see us getting into some of the lower rankings. Only 59.5% of Tennessee working age adults are either working or looking for adult. So that's 40% of working age adults who either are not looking for work or have kind of given up on the idea of working. So also another area is that we would like to see improvement is post-high school educational attainment. Tennessee actually ranks very high for our graduation rate from high school, which is great, but we rank 41st in post-high school educational attainment. Only 41% of Tennessee adults have attained an associate's degree or higher. And that's an area where we are improving. That was only 38.7% just a few years ago. So looking at that longitudinal data, sometimes we can see where even where our ranking is lower than what we wanted, we are showing an improvement. And so that's great. So this slide shows those areas of our 15 metrics that matter the most, where we're most challenged as a state. So for example, borrowers with severely delinquent debt. 17.7% of Tennessee borrowers have debt that is past due in collections or severely delinquent. And that is, we rank 42nd nationally for that metric. In addition, poverty is high in Tennessee. 14% of Tennesseans live in poverty. This is an area where we're going the wrong direction. That's an increase from 13.6% in 2021. We rank 42nd nationally for poverty. And we actually, those percentages are higher for young people. Children under the age of 18, I think it's maybe 1 in 5 are living in households experiencing poverty. Criminal justice, so Tennessee ranks 44th in its incarceration rate. 817 out of every 100,000 Tennesseans are confined in correctional facilities. Moving on to education, Tennessee ranks 44th in young children not in school. 61% of children aged 3 and 4 are not enrolled in any type of school, pre-K, that type of early learning environment that we know prepares them for their entire educational career. We also rank 46th in adults avoiding care due to the cost of medical care. In 2023, 15% of Tennessee adults went without medical care due to concerns about the cost and their ability to afford that medical care. And finally, voter turnout, we rank 47th. In 2020, only 60% of eligible voters cast a ballot. So those are all concerning metrics for us and places where we hope that we can find policy solutions to improve those outcomes for our state. So next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how data can be useful for nonprofits like us. And I'm going to do that by walking through a few areas where Think Tennessee is focused on using data to either highlight challenges, identify improvements, or communicate policy needs to either the general public or to our friends in the legislature and other elected officials. So we'll start with voter disenfranchisement. Strengthening democracy and civic engagement has been one of the core issues at Think Tennessee since its founding in 2017. In fact, it was it was looking at data on Tennessee outcomes that really highlighted voting as a particular challenge in Tennessee. And one element of that is voter disenfranchisement. In 2024, Tennessee ranked 50 out of 50, so the worst, out of all of the states in voter disenfranchisement. So basically 8 out of every 100,000 voting age Tennesseans is ineligible to vote due to a felony conviction. And that is particularly high for our Black neighbors who have higher rates of felony convictions. So this is how we define part of the problem is we use the data to identify the what of our research and advocacy. And so then we try and look at the why. If you go back one more, sorry, Helen, I was going to talk about the map. So on the right side of this slide, you see a map where we did a policy scan of whether states require payment of legal financial obligations. Those are your court fines and fees before you can have your voting rights restored. And as you can see, Tennessee is yellow, one of very few states that requires that, and can help us understand maybe why some of this voter disenfranchisement ranking has been so poor in Tennessee. So what do we do with that data? We then produce reports trying to share this information and identify potential policy changes that might improve it. So for example, in January 2024, we released a policy brief that walked through Tennessee's voting rights restoration process, compared our procedures to other states, and provided policy recommendations on how to improve the process. In preparation for last year's November election, we released a voter education series to inform voters on how to register, election timing, the rules about absentee voting, more information on voting rights restoration, as well as addressing election integrity, which is very important for many of us. So some of these materials were translated into Spanish and Arabic and shared with our partners across the state and in local communities. Most recently, we have begun to conduct more research to bring more clarity about the voting rights restoration process, who is the most affected, and what changes can be made to improve the process. So our hope is always that this information can lead to policy change that will improve outcomes in Tennessee. So as an example, this year we worked on voter disenfranchisement changes to this policy at the state level. And in May 2nd, the governor signed a bill into law changing how Tennesseans get their voting rights restored. The bill basically means that Tennesseans no longer need to have their gun rights restored before receiving their voting rights. Since 2023, Tennesseans needed to either receive a full pardon from the governor or have their full rights of citizenship restored, which includes their gun rights, before being able to get their voting rights restored. However, with this bill, Tennesseans will now have to petition a circuit court for the restoration of their citizenship rights. This constituted a win for our organization. We work in coalition with peer organizations to advocate for this change. However, we still see a lot of improvement that could occur with our voting rights restoration system. And so we will continue to work on that. There's a new electronic portal for election administrators that will help confirm voter eligibility, and that should be implemented by 2028. We think that's an exciting and potentially helpful piece of news in this space. Let's move on to the next one. So transit. So another priority for Think Tennessee is expanding transit access. We think it's really important both because it reduces costs for people in terms of their transportation costs. It's better for the air quality and is, again, a really good indicator of access to economic opportunity, places that have good transit. In 2015, Transportation for America led a Transportation Innovation Academy in Indianapolis, and with leaders from Indianapolis, Raleigh, and Nashville. They came together to share knowledge. They visited all of the cities that have had some transit success, and they developed local leadership to advance transportation and transit plans. All three of those cities went on to try and pass a transit referendum to get additional funding for transit, and both Indianapolis and Raleigh were successful in that, and unfortunately, Nashville was not. So That referendum failed in 2018 with 64% opposition. Despite this, there was still an appetite for achieving dedicated funding for transit in Nashville. So when the new referendum was announced, Think Tennessee capitalized on the opportunity to inform the transit policy discussions. So we produced a series of resources and reports that emphasized Nashville's need for dedicated funding for transit. That included our Changing Lanes policy brief. We also created a dedicated transit funding map where we highlighted that 46 of the 50 largest metro areas nationwide had secured some form of dedicated funding for transit. The two of the four biggest cities that do not have that are located in Tennessee, Nashville and Memphis. These findings were cited by the mayor in his announcement about the referendum in a lot of media reports, including the New York Times. And really, I think, help people understand sort of the national approach to these issues where maybe Tennessee was falling behind. Additionally, we hosted a panel in October with Mayor O'Connell and Jeanette Sadiq Khan to discuss the need for transit and the benefits of dedicated transit funding in Nashville. We're really excited to say that the transit referendum passed with overwhelming support, 65%. You'll notice that's almost the opposite. And thousands more Nashvillians will now have access to safe, affordable, and reliable multimodal transportation options. This was the first success of any city in Tennessee since the passage of the Improve Act in 2017. And we see immense opportunity to take lessons learned from this process and bring dedicated funding for transit to more cities across the state, including Memphis and Chattanooga. Finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about housing. As you noticed in our state and county dashboard data, Tennessee has relatively low housing cost, particularly compared to other states. We've always been considered a state with a low cost of living, and a lot of that has been driven by lower housing prices than other states. However, our research has found that many Tennesseans are struggling to afford a home and that our housing prices are increasing rapidly. We are a very strong growing economy. We've been growing in terms of population quite a lot, but we have not been building enough housing to support that growth. Over the past decade, we've only built 6 homes for every 10 new jobs. And so because of that housing shortage, over half of renters in Tennessee spend at least 30% of their income on housing cost. And in particular, there are striking disparities when it comes to housing growth and affordability across counties. And this is an area, again, where sometimes our statewide information, our statewide data obscures what's happening in the local level, and therefore it's important for us to highlight the county level or even sometimes neighborhood level data to show where those challenges really are. So what are we doing about housing here in Tennessee? I think Tennessee. In 2023, we partnered with the Urban Institute to identify institutions in Nashville that might be helpful in promoting affordable housing partnership. What we found was that faith-based institutions own most of our institution-owned land. Almost over 3,400 acres of land in Tennessee is owned by our churches, our synagogues, and our mosques. And while most of our faith-based partners have land, they don't have the funding or the expertise to necessarily enter into affordable housing work. And so we partnered this year with local groups to create the Nashville Faith and Housing Initiative. We hosted 3 summer meetings and created the Housing Resource Guide to share information and resources on opportunities for faith-based institutions who are interested in developing housing that is affordable for their communities. Additionally, we have a directory of Nashville-based developers who are interested in working in faith-based institutions, and allow for all of these partners to convene, to meet with each other, and to find opportunities to develop affordable housing on faith-owned land, faith-based institution-owned land. We're excited because Metro Nashville Housing Division really liked this project and has included it in some of their grant proposals on behalf of the city, and now has funding to continue this project on in the future. So, and we're also working with the State Department of Health to look at a statewide faith and housing initiative. So that's really exciting opportunity to partner with folks who have not maybe historically been involved in affordable housing, but see the need and want to be part of the solution. And with that, I will turn it back over to Helen to talk a little bit about some of the limitations that we find when using data in our policy development and advocacy work.
Thank you so much, Amy. Yes, I think now with the resources laid out and also showcasing how data has been useful for us in our work, it's also important to recognize that data is not everything, and oftentimes we have to take into consideration certain limits when using data. The first point I want to highlight is that some data sometimes does not provide the full picture. Unfortunately, data does. I don't want to say unfortunately, my bad. I'm a little bit of a data nerd, but data does not exist in a vacuum. Therefore, we always have to provide the context in which those numbers live. A great example that we have discovered through our criminal justice work is that Tennessee is one of the worst performing states when it comes to crime rates. And looking at that number solely could lead to local leaders or legislators to advocate for policies that would increase incarceration, produce more punitive policies, or increase our fines or fees policies, which is something that we do not want to pursue as an organization. Understanding that crime is, again, not existing in a vacuum, and also considering that Tennessee is also one of the worst performing states when it comes to poverty, labor force participation, unemployment, and even homelessness, is a context that we want to bring forward, and understanding that not everything has to be dealt through punitive legislation. Another example that Amy highlighted before is the housing issue, understanding that homes in Tennessee compared to other states are perhaps very inexpensive, but that does not mean that those homes are affordable to the average Tennessean, and especially how those home prices can generate greater burdens across the state in different counties. The next or another point that I would like to highlight in this element is that, as well as we mentioned before, having greater or higher level data points, meaning at a state level or across any demographic, could also hide or obscure the realities of local communities or specific demographic groups. So that's the job that we have tried to do in Think Tennessee, to also highlight the difference across geographies and also the differences across communities. The next point that I want to make is that sometimes big disruptions in data collection process can hinder its reliability. One big example that we saw was the COVID-19 pandemic, in which many of the national US Census surveys would have a difficult time to actually produce reliable statistics when it comes to a lot of our household metrics. And oftentimes, even as an organization, we see that other partners completely avoid utilizing 2020 data just because of that issue. But another example of that is when there are big economic, political, or social shocks that happen in a country, especially in the context of surveys, people's opinion can change very rapidly, and that might not necessarily reflect what is the opinion during a stable situation. I can go more into that, but it's a little bit too complex. Next, I want to highlight that there are also challenges when reporting attitudes, beliefs, and behavior, very similar to what I was mentioning above. environmental changes can shape people's opinion and can cause challenges when relying on survey data, but at the same time, there are challenges when it comes to social desirability and preference falsification, especially when the people are being asked about something that is socially very salient. Let's say electoral participation. When you go online and say like, what was the voter turnout for Tennessee, you will see very different numbers because there is survey data in which people might say that they voted when they didn't, or vice versa. And therefore, sometimes it's harder to assess the reliability on surveys. That does not mean that just because of the statistical methods that often very reliable organizations use, you can minimize that risk, but it's something to take into account when talking about attitudes and behavior. Another part that I think is specifically prevalent right now is the lack of funding, and this investment can obscure the realities of minorities and smaller geographic areas. This is not a recent issue. For many years, big survey programs have been slowly defunded, which means that just in order for those to be more reliable, cutting costs and making smaller samples could mean that smaller geographies and minority groups are not fully represented in those samples, which is something that we, as an organization that is very data heavy, we care for the reliability of the data, but we also want to highlight those differences across communities. And that has most definitely have become a bigger issue in the recent months. That does not mean that data is not a great resource though. And that's all for me. I'm going to move into Mary so we can have a discussion of everything that we have discussed so far, and hopefully any questions that you'll have.
Awesome. Thanks, Helen. That was a lot of really good information. It looks like we have a little bit of time left, and we've shared a lot of content with you, talked about the role that data can play in an organization, talked about two tools that we have, and explained how you can use them and access the data that we have for Tennessee. And then talked about how we apply data in our policy and advocacy work specifically. And as we were sort of thinking about this presentation and preparing, there were some questions that sort of rose to the top that we thought might be interesting to discuss as a group, if folks would like. I guess the first one is really thinking about the federal changes that we're seeing and how that is affecting our organizations in our communities. So Helen spoke a little bit about some of the changes to survey research, but just curious if there are folks who would share anything about the federal changes and the effect that they're having on your organization specifically. And we can also dig into any of these other ones if they're more pertinent to your work. So the other question we thought we could discuss is, how data can help tell the story of those impacts. And then just, whether there are other challenges or opportunities on the horizon for your specific communities, how our data and research can be more effective in supporting your work. So as Helen and Amy talked about, we're constantly producing this information, and the dashboards specifically are things that we produce every year or every other year. So we're always open to feedback or new ideas or thoughts on metrics that we could be including. And then the last question we have here is just, how do you view your role in utilizing data to serve your community? So would love to hear about how data shows up in your work as well. Well, it could be the case that we were just so thorough in our explanations and content that you're left still digesting all of that. So these are open questions. Amy, Helen, and I are here for any further questions, or if you have ideas about our research work, or ways that things that you're working on specifically, or if you can't find a particular type of data that you think would be impactful for your organization, please do reach out and let us know. how we can be supportive. And then on the next slide, again, we just have some QR codes that link to those resources. I also popped some links in the chat. So that's a QR code to our State of Our State dashboard, which is also just on our thinktennessee.org website under the research tab. Another QR code for our State of Our Counties dashboard. That's also in the same spot. And then on the next slide, we have some information related to our social media channels. You can follow us there and get all of our news about all of our releases and data highlights there. Or you can sign up for our newsletter where we, of course, include the latest and greatest from Think Tennessee. I just saw a question in the chat, so I'll just answer that really quickly. And if there's something else burning, feel free to ask it right now. It looks like this question is about whether there's a process for suggesting new indicators or metrics for inclusion in the state and county dashboards. So that's a good question. I think the process is generally you email Amy or me or Helen at Think Tennessee. It's just our first name at thinktn.org. We are, looking to provide a lot of information and would love to include every metric under the sun. We do have some standards as it relates to the type of sources that we will look to for specific data. We try to use government sources or open sources so that folks always have transparency about where our information is coming from. So there are some limitations in terms of the metrics and the sources that we can use, but we would love your suggestions and would love to understand which metrics you would be interested in. So please do reach out.
Yes, I want to, sorry. I want to piggyback a little bit on Mary's point. I think it will be extremely valuable for us to receive feedback from people that work on the ground addressing these issues to highlight some metrics that we have not explored so far. I think the current number in the state of our state is the largest number of metrics that we have explored in the 7th iteration. Not accounting for also all the disaggregated levels that we have available. Therefore, that's why we have over 56,000 data points. But again, as Mary mentioned, we're always open to explore more points that perhaps we don't see in our day-to-day work, but it's very relevant for the organizations that are working on the ground. And as Mary mentioned, there are specific criteria that we follow when it comes to geographical coverage, periodicity, validity, etc. If you want to look more into our technical notes or methodology, those are available also on the State of Our State dashboard site, or in the case of the State of Our Counties, the State of Our County site. We try to keep this as updated as possible, and this is one of the great resources we have when it comes to what are certain policy issues that we have not explored, and how we just knowing how bad we do sometimes also can inform our work in the future. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to come and share this data. We were so excited to join TNN and all of you. Thanks, April and Andrea and everyone over at TNN for helping to organize this. Angela and Dorian, thank you.
Thank you, Mary, Amy, and Helen. This is a wealth of information, and I know it may be intimidating for some of you, and you may have questions that you didn't want to ask during this recording. However, we are going to provide a PDF copy of the presentation, contact information for Mary, Amy, and Helen, and also the links that were provided in the chat. We'll curate all of them into one email and send it to each of you. Now, if you're attending on behalf of someone else and you are not on the registration list, be sure to drop your email address in the chat, and we'll make sure that you are added to the follow-up email list. So final round, if you have any questions, just go ahead and stay on a little bit longer. We'll stay on for about 30 seconds to a minute after the closing of the session to allow you to ask your question. Or if there's a certain section that you want them to go back and cover, they will be more than happy to do that. But with that, we love giving the gift of early to each of you. Thank you so much for joining us for this session with our wonderful partners over at Think Tennessee, and we will see you at the next session. Thank you so much.